How's everybody? I had a great vacation, but I'm still on it, kind of. At least mentally, I am. I need a rest from it. If you can imagine having two small boys and going on vacation. Exactly. It's just like, wow. Especially after airports, and those guys are so active. Oh my God. It's like, I know kids are active, but honestly, anybody that's been around my kids or tried to watch my kids, I don't know where Irene is. There you are. Hi, Irene. They're more active than most. It's just absolutely true. They never took naps, like after 1 year old, or even, I don't even know if we made it to a year of taking naps. And then Elijah's a morning person and Josiah's a night owl. So it's just like, Josiah's just yapping, and he just talks constantly. Isn't that right, Daddy? Isn't that right, Daddy? Isn't that right, Mommy? Is that right, Mommy? Is that right, Mommy? And so we'll be laying in bed 11 o'clock at night, and I can still hear him just... Then as soon as the sun comes up, man, Eli's pulling on you. You're like, oh. I love him. It was great. I'm just tired. How are you all? How's everybody feeling today? So I want to just share a little bit. I've really been contemplating more and more on what some people call the law of attraction, what in more religious circles we call faith, but being able to change your outcomes. And I want to lay down some foundational principles that I wholeheartedly believe, but I realize they are radical and generally, let's say, unprovable, meaning you can't find scientific research or replicate something in a laboratory or a study or statistically show that this is true. But it is what all really sacred texts, including the Bible, teach, and it's what pretty much all the mystics say. So it's not completely an original thought or an original idea. But essentially, so let's just do it this way. So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? And all things were made by the Word. Without the Word, nothing was made that has been made. And we have an unfortunate translation. Our translation says, in him is life, and the life is the light of all men. But in the oldest commentary that we have on that fragment of the Gospel of John, so in other words, you can get access to a commentary that was written that's older than the oldest fragment we have of this passage in the Gospel of John. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, the manuscript itself predates the text that they use, the oldest manuscript that they use for translations. Everybody tracking with me? And the way the bishop comments on it is he says that verse says, in all things is life, and that life is the light of all men. So in other words, without him, in the beginning was the Word. All things were made by the Word. Without the Word, nothing was made that has been made. And in all things is life, and that life is the light of all men. Got it? So what that's saying then, if logos, and particularly in the Greek culture that term comes out of, is a word that we would use for consciousness. Consciousness, awareness, thought, direction, intelligence. So at the foundation of everything in the universe is consciousness. That's the foundation of everything. So if you could penetrate and go inside, I don't know it's hard to describe these things. I'm going to try and use some metaphors, but I don't know how well they'll work. They may just confuse you more. But if you could go inside of everything that exists, inside of a rock, inside of a seed, inside of a river, inside of an animal, inside of you, you're going to find consciousness. And that consciousness is logos, and logos is God. Right? So part of the problem that we have is that we make God something that God is not, because for most of us, God is the collection of our conscious projections. So in other words, if the Logos is God, if consciousness, if you think about God in this way, and I knew when I started talking about this that people were going to scatter. What do you do? If you think about it this way, the intelligence, whatever that mind is that makes a blade of grass grow and become a blade of grass and stay a blade of grass instead of changing into something else. Whatever that intelligence is that keeps the earth revolving around the sun and holds the solar system in place. Whatever that intelligence is, let's say that, there's a huge asteroid field in our solar system, and we're being bombarded with things from outer space all the time. So whatever that intelligence is that has prevented a giant asteroid from hitting the Earth, that has been able to guide it off course, whatever the intelligence is, whatever that thing is that causes a baby to gestate in the womb, whatever that thing is that regulates your blood pressure and your heartbeat and your breathing, whatever that is, all of that is God. Right? So what we tend to do is create a pattern, a mental pattern of consciousness that seems like separation, so that rather than us swimming in the ocean of this consciousness, if you will, that is God, we have a tendency to collect God as this other that has attributes and qualities that we think that God has, and put him off somewhere so that he's a man on a throne. You get it? He gets upset. It's interesting because the word forgiveness, in the Greek language, the word forgiveness has absolutely nothing to do with emotions. When we say you need to forgive somebody, generally what we're talking about is you need to let go of the anger, you need to let go of the hate, it's an emotional term. In the Greek, it's not an emotional term at all. It's a term for release or really freedom, pardon, that kind of thing. It has no emotional qualities invested in it whatsoever. But we get the idea that this consciousness, or that God is this guy in the sky who gets offended at the things that we do and gets his feelings hurt and now needs to forgive us for the bad things that we did. And if he doesn't forgive us for the bad things that we did, then he's doing something emotionally to us, because that's how we operate at the level of consciousness that we're at. So we take the level that we're at and we try to make sense out of reality and the way we experience it, and we end up projecting it onto God. And we limit God and make God smaller or unlike what God is. So that in many ways, the God that we believe in is more a reflection of the level of consciousness that we're at than the level of consciousness that is actually divine. Did that make sense? So that the Bible then, especially the Bible, becomes a mirror to us. It's like a Rorschach test. You know those ink blot tests? I can't talk. Ink blot tests that, if you had a beginning psychology class, they would show you the ink blot tests, and then they'd show you an ink blot. What do you see? And the person, I think, maybe originally, if they don't know much about it, they think there's a right or wrong answer, and so they're trying to get it right. There's no right or wrong answer at all. All the person, it's a method of psychoanalysis to just try to draw out what supposedly may or may not be in the unconscious mind or the subconscious mind. And so whatever you see is what is a reflection of you, not an actual objective answer about the ink blot. Does that make sense? Scripture very much works the same way, so that there is enough of a myriad of examples of what God is like, because God is all and in all, that you can gravitate towards any polarity that you want to. If you want to believe in a God that's into genocide, if you want to believe in a God that is vengeful and mean and hateful, you'll be drawn to those scriptures and you'll relate to God in that way. If you want a God that is merciful, if you want a God that is loving, if you want a God that is good all the time, you'll gravitate towards those verses. See how that works? So, then what happens to us is, okay, so this is interesting. One of the things that's really troubled me in Scripture from Genesis chapter 3, when you start telling people, you are divine, you're an aspect of God, you have the spark of divinity within you, you are God, you are a God, however you language that. Religious people will come back at me and say, well, that's the lie that the serpent told Adam and Eve in the garden. You're just parroting the same old lie that the serpent parroted, because the serpent told Adam and Eve, if you eat of the tree and the day you eat of it, you will be like God, right? He said, you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. So when you tell people you're like God, you are divine, they say, oh, that's the same lie that the serpent. But they don't keep reading. Because if you keep reading at the end of chapter 3, it says that God said, behold, the man has become as one of us, knowing good and evil. Therefore, lest he reach out his hand and take of the tree of life. So it wasn't a lie. God even confirmed it. The serpent said, you'll become like God. And God then came back and said, he's become like one of us. Which is why in the Jewish text, the serpent is not the devil. That's a Christian invention. I mean, in a Jewish mindset, they don't read it that way because they don't have the benefit of Revelation 12 that tells you that the serpent is the accuser and the devil and all that. So they don't have that same interpretation. Are you with me? Now, our translation says, man has become has become like one of us. But the of us is not in the original text. What it actually says is, the man has become like one. So here's the issue of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or the issue of the fall is that we are all interconnected in this ocean, if you will, of consciousness. We are not separate from it. We are not other than it. But the consciousness that developed from eating at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil made us appear to ourselves like a separate entity or a singularity. I'll explain it in a second. So here's where I'm going to try and give you an analogy, and it probably stinks. So we can talk about it after or something, but let's try and do it this way. If you think about a computer, all right? A computer, if you will, now give me some flexibility with my metaphor here, okay? A computer has its own consciousness. It turns on, it runs programs in the background. You can click on stuff, you can click on apps or programs, whatever they call them now, pull them up. If you need to type, you can go on the software. If you need to get on the internet, you can go to Safari or whatever you use. Got it? But it's all inside the computer. And you have hardware and you have software, right? So, if you'll allow me, it pains me to use this analogy, but it's the best I could come up with. The computer is, think about it this way, maybe. The computer is God and creation. So if you think about the software as creation, then the software is in the computer, right? And the computer, so to speak, is in the software. Otherwise, when you click the mouse, nothing would happen. But it also transcends and is bigger than the creation itself. So it's both is and other than, but not really. Do you get it? And then when you enter into this body, what happens is you become like an app. Because you reference, even though you're on the hard drive, and even though theoretically you have access to all the software, my computer people are probably going to kill me for this. I'm going to just like, but access to all the software, right? And if you were a virus, maybe you could go into all of it and eat it up or do whatever you do. But because we're in this body, time and space, because we're locked into time and space, this is what happens to our consciousness. Our ability to be conscious is the part of us that gives us direct access to the divine. I'm going to say that again. Our ability to be conscious is the part of us that gives us direct access to the divine, but also to everything. So in a baby's first few years of life, they're pure awareness. They're just pure awareness. They're conscious, but they're just aware because they haven't developed that analytical ability yet to separate everything into mental categories and label them and judge them as pleasant, unpleasant, or good and evil. Got it? So without that analytical ability, they're just wide open to whatever. But as that analytical ability develops, you become smaller. Your conscious awareness becomes smaller until you believe that you are whatever the programming is that you've been given throughout your life. I heard a story. I was actually talking to an individual recently, doing some coaching with them. And this person was telling me that, I can't remember if it was them, I think it was them, or if it was someone they knew. They had a certain name that the parents had given them, but they always called them by their nickname. And it wasn't until the child was in the 4th grade that one of the teachers is calling roll and ignores the nickname and calls him by the real name, and the kid's not answering. And finally the teacher says, yeah, but your name is this. No, my name's this. No, your name is this. He goes home and asks mom, mad and heck, Mom, teacher said my name is such and such. Well, teacher's actually right. That's what's on your birth certificate. And this is like traumatic to the kid, right? Old enough to be traumatic, but young enough to not really get it. Old enough to understand, but you get it? So what I'm saying is that even our name is something that we take on as a pattern in our culture that gives us a sense of identity that then begins to isolate us in our consciousness more and more. So that what happens is, if you could think about it this way, you become stuck in the app so that all you know how to run in terms of your consciousness is whatever that app that you are is programmed to do. And you just keep doing it. And what mysticism, the mystical experience, gives you the ability to do, what meditation is supposed to help you do, is transcend the app in consciousness or break out of those limited patterns of thinking and consciousness that you're locked into so that once again you can have access to the whole computer. You can have access to everything that's on it. You can move around anywhere within it. So that when you die, when you shed this body, what happens is you kind of shed the app and you return back. When a person goes to heaven, where do they go? It's not a physical location. You're returning to a place that exists inside the Logos or inside awareness or consciousness. Now, if at the foundation of everything is consciousness, then if you can shift your consciousness, you can literally have, anything you really want. You can attract into your life anything, pretty much anything you really want. The problem is getting outside of that app is really, really difficult. So in other words, if you can go deeply enough in consciousness and shed, even just briefly, the app, shed the patterns and the programming of how you think the world works, how it's supposed to work, what you deserve, what you don't deserve, what you can have, what you can't have. And you can just be in consciousness. You can interact with that level in such a way that you can recreate a different life for yourself, that you can attract different things. People who are able to do that consistently look like miracle workers. It looks like they're doing something that is outside the realm of physics, what governs the way things work. But if at the deepest level of reality is that intelligence. So go, if you get Netflix, go on Netflix and watch a documentary called Heal. And one of my favorite thinkers right now, teachers right now, is Joe Dispenza. And Joe Dispenza's in that documentary. And his story is he became completely paralyzed. Well, not completely paralyzed, but from whatever point in the spine down in a motorcycle accident. It's in the documentary, so if I get it wrong, you can get it right. And he decided, and he says this very thing, he decided, this consciousness that makes the ground grow, that makes my heart beat and stuff, if I could get into it, then I could rebuild my spine. Yes. And literally through lots of meditation. I'm not talking, we think we can just do something in 15 minutes. He would spend all day letting go of who he was as Joe Dispenza and go into that place in consciousness, and through thought and through consciousness, literally rebuilt his spine. Something that is completely impossible to do in medical science. So this is why, people start coming, they get so messed up. Because they're like, I don't know how to pray now, because you've been praying to something other than. Rather than understanding that if you can go deeply enough into consciousness and let go enough of your agreements about how reality works and project a thought, an image, a feeling, and hold it until you believe that it has happened, until you believe that it has come to pass, you can have it. Yes. That is the foundation of all miracles, all mountain moving, all magic. Aligning those parts of your consciousness. Basically, if you go back and listen to the stuff I did a few years ago on the lost mode of prayer, and I talked about the difference between playing the video game and hacking the computer language that makes the video game work. Most of us, as long as we're just stuck in our normal mode of consciousness, all we're doing is playing the video game, which means we have to operate within the rules of the game. But if you're the programmer and you know how to get behind it, you realize that there's a language that's completely different, looks completely different, acts completely different than the images you're seeing on the screen. And if you could go in as a programmer and change something within the programming, you change the rules of the game. Yes. And the experience becomes completely different. So again, you have to get out of your normal state of consciousness to that level where the programming is, the logos. And once you're in that level, then you can change the programming that will then change your reality. That's something that you do. It's not something that you ask God to do for you. Because at your deepest level, you are divine. So you'll find, if you just go back and even just read the Bible, you'll find that we ask God to do a lot of things that He told us to do. It's true. Jesus told the disciples, you go out, cast out demons, you go out, heal the sick. Somebody encounters a real demon, they're, oh my God, please deal with it. The Catholic Church has a whole list of prayers to take someone through an exorcism. Jesus never said, if you encounter a demon, ask God to cast it out. He said, you go and heal the sick. He never said to go and ask Him. He said, the works that I do, you shall do also. If you say to the mountain, be removed and cast in the sea, and don't doubt in your heart consciousness, but believe that what you say will happen, it will happen. He didn't say, if you ask me to move the mountain. He said, if you speak to the mountain, it'll move. If you say to the sycamore tree, be uprooted and planted into the sea, it will obey you. All right. You doing all right? So let me just give you a few examples. So when we went to, so I learned this early on about incubating. And by incubating, I mean holding a reality that is not in your mind, in your intention, in your imagination, and in your feeling as though it already was. So that you have two schematics. You have the schematic that you've created in consciousness through your imagination, through your intention, through your thinking, and through your believing. And then you have the one that currently exists out here. And they're going to be contrary. So when we started the church in 2002, we had to have had the worst location of any church that's ever started in Pueblo. I mean, we're on Elizabeth, so that was nice, but we were across the street from like Red Lobster, and I'm not even sure if Olive Garden was there then, but you know where I'm talking about. And there's a building now where there's like a karate studio, and I think there's still a church up there. And there used to be a smoker-friendly thing in there. And we were in an upstairs room, just like right above smoker-friendly, so that like the smell of smoke was just like permeating. And if you couldn't get upstairs, forget it, because you couldn't come. Anyway, and we'd been in existence for about 7 or 8 months. And I started incubating the thought, the belief, the imagination that we had a building. Giving thanks for it, that we have a building, as though we already did. I would even talk to people that didn't know, our building. I would talk about our building. If I talk to people in the church, we have a building? Well, yeah. Well, where is it? Well, you can't see it yet. I mean, I'm telling you, that's the level you have to get at. So, I get a call from a realtor who heard from one of her friends that was coming to the church that we needed a building, and she says, hey, I know this great place on Adams. It used to be a Methodist church. Now, the funny thing about the story was, my first job in ministry was the youth pastor at that church, and they fired me after 90 days. So I knew exactly what building she was talking about, but it's 11,000 square feet. She's like, and our budget that year, I think our total income our first year was $60-some thousand, total complete. That was everything that came in. And I was living off my savings. And they said, well, it's only $300,000. Like, great. We've been in existence less than a year. We've only brought in $60-some thousand. That's not even enough for a family to buy a house of $300,000 to even qualify to make the payment. But what the heck? Because I knew, see? Now, what do? If I go off of what I know about borrowing money, what I know about budgeting, what I know about can we make the payment, I don't even consider the idea. But because I'm incubating over here, we have a building, I'm like, psh, I go and sit down. I mean, it took a lot of guts to sit there because they didn't know our finances. It took a lot of guts to sit there and hand them the thing and be like, okay, So I talked to the person at the bank. Well, because I said, I don't think the bank will give us any money. I tell the realtor. Now, this realtor called me. I didn't call a realtor and start looking. Nobody knew I was incubating this. This realtor calls me. She says, well, my dad's the president at such and such bank. So next thing I know, I'm sitting down with one of his people, whatever. I'm sorry, I'm still on vacation. Like, what do they call him? Mortgage agent. I sit down with the mortgage agent, and she's like, well, yeah, I'm sure we can make it work. Whatever, you just have to come up with $75,000 down payment. And we had no savings, and our entire income for the ministry the previous year was $60-some thousand. We had to come up with 75. I said, no problem. I got up the next morning, I'll never forget, this guy that had been a pastor in town and burnout, whatever, shows up at our church that Sunday. And I stood up and said, we're going to buy a building, and all we have to do is come up with $75,000. It's going to be great. We're going to have this building. This guy got up and walked out. I never have seen him again. Because I'm sure he's used to this program where you pressure people and all this stuff and make you feel guilty and you need to do all this for the church to help. But see, that's working over here within the realm of just this physical reality trying to make something happen. That's not hacking reality. That's not working at the level of consciousness, you see? So I call a friend in Texas, and I said, well, we're going to be able to buy a building. We got to come up with $75,000, though. So, could you be praying with us? Because I don't know where I'm going to get $75,000. I mean, I'm thinking it's like getting close to Christmas time. I'm thinking maybe we could make ornaments and sell. I mean, we could have spaghetti dinner. But you could have, how many spaghetti dinners would you have to raise $75,000? And who's going to come besides the 30 people that are already coming? In which case, you might as well just take an offering and save the money on the spaghetti or the ornaments. You get it? So I talked to my friend. This all happens within a span of a week. I talked to my friend. He calls me back. He says, now he's from Texas oil country. I know he's got really, really, really wealthy people in his church. He had one member of his church that she had bought into radio stations back in the 70s and forgot about it. They sold, not radio stations, television stations. Local stations, these local stations got sold or something. She gets a check in the mail for like $8 million. An investment that she completely forgot about. So my friend calls me up and he says, I got good news for you. He said, we're going to give you an offering. I talked to the elders. We're going to give you an offering. We're going to sow some money towards your ministry. It's going to be the biggest offering we've ever given to any ministry. And he says, are you sitting down? I'm like, okay, here it comes. I said, yeah. He says, it's $10,000. We're going to give you $10,000. And I was happy, but my heart sank at the same time because I thought, okay, 10,000 does not go a long way towards 75 because I'm stuck in this over here because I'm in between the two, right? So I have to keep coming back to, no, I've got it. The very next day, I get a call from the bank, and they said, we had a meeting, we were talking, if we make you come up with $75,000, we're totally setting you up to fail, so here's what we're going to do. Do you think there's any possible way you could come up with $10,000? Because the only way we'll do the deal is if you can come up with $10,000. If you can come up with that, then we'll do the deal. I said, I can come up with $10,000. Are you sure? Oh, yeah, I'm sure. I got it. What I didn't find out until, so then they approve us for the loan, we buy the building, and we're in within less than a year. That never happens with churches because they don't like to loan money to churches because you don't have a consistent income you can count on. Right? So what I found out later, probably shouldn't say this live, but I'm going to say it anyway. They adjusted the numbers on our financial sheet to make it look better than it was before they took it to the underwriting committee. I had nothing to do with that. So we got into a building. How is that possible? Because I was incubating it at the level of consciousness, and it shifted our reality. So then we decide, I'm just sharing like different stories. We decided we're going to pay off. We had bought some land, some different stuff, some things that didn't work out. We decided we're going to pay off all our debt. I think at that time we had, as a ministry, we had, I don't remember, $275,000 worth of debt or something. I announced that we were going to take an offering to go towards paying off debt, and I thought maybe we're on a 5-year plan. Money started pouring in, but I'm doing this here, and that's all I did. I said, we're going to take an offering. I wasn't pressuring people. I wasn't doing all this stuff. Before we took the offering, we had already had, I think, $105,000 come in towards paying off before we even took the offering. Had somebody hand me a check for $75,000. They, at the time, wasn't even coming to the church. And I got my master's degree. I mean, I know some of you have heard these stories before, but I just want to let you know, some of you that haven't, I'm not just telling you theory. Because I know it's like off the chain different than what people think. Right. When I got my master's degree, I hadn't even finished when I got into my master's program, I hadn't even finished my bachelor's degree. I'd gotten a degree in theology, but anyway, the president of that school ended up going to prison, federal prison, for running a slave camp. It was the funniest thing in the world, for slavery. It was the funniest thing in the world because I saw this thing on Facebook. I didn't even know this person really on Facebook. president of Bible school in trouble for running a slave ring. I said, oh, that sounds like where I went. And sure enough, I was just being sarcastic because the spirit of the thing, the nature of the thing, I linked on it sure enough. But it wasn't regionally accredited. So when I started my bachelor's program, they wouldn't give me any academic credits for all my Bible school work, so I was pretty much starting from scratch. So some of you know Rob Bundy, right? So Rob was going through the same bachelor's program, and he got into the master's program at Adams State and just happened to get sick. So I went to visit him in the hospital, and Tiffany, his wife, sits there and tells me, she says, Aaron, you should try to get into the master's program at Adams. Now, I still have a year's worth of credits on my bachelor's degree that I have to get. And I said, really? And she starts telling me about it. It's a cohort that was here local. That was, I'm incriminating myself all kinds on live today. That was 5 minutes from my house. I would never even have to drive to Alamosa. It was on the weekends, but not on Sundays, so my Sundays would be open. The tuition, I think I was able to get the whole thing for $15,000, which is dirt cheap for a master's degree. And, but it starts in 2 days. Well, I still have like 40 credits that I have to get towards my bachelor's degree. But I know how these things work. So I call them up at Adams. And I say, hey, can I still get into this cohort that starts in 2 days? And they said, sure. Well, how does it work? Well, you're let in on a probationary basis for the first semester, and you have to get us everything. You have to take the GMAT. You have to get us your transcripts. You have to, prove that you have your bachelor's degree, yada, 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 within the first semester. And then in December, you go before the board, whatever, and they decide whether or not you can be admitted into the program. So basically, we'll let everybody in, and then you just got to prove that you are who you say you are in the first semester. Got it? And so I said, well, there's one small problem. Now, I did not lie. Please understand, I did not lie. So there's one small problem. I don't have my bachelor's degree yet. Oh, that is a problem. Well, and then she just pauses for a minute. She says, well, what's your GPA? And I said, well, I have straight A's, which is true. I had straight A's. Straight A's. Well, will you have your bachelor's degree? She says, how many more credits do you have to get? A few? Well, as long as you have it by December, we'll let you in, and as long as you have it, as long as you're graduating in December, it'll be fine. Okay. So 2 days later, I'm sitting in a class for my master's degree, thinking, what the heck am I doing? But I just thought, this door open, this has to be God. I'm just going to walk through it. I'm just going to say yes to the opportunity, and what's the worst that could happen? I do a semester's worth of work, and they kick me out. Big deal, right? I guess. Well, in the meantime, my advisor gets changed for my bachelor's program, my academic advisor. And so when I had a new academic advisor, I thought, well, I'm going to ask about my Bible school credits one more time. So they said, well, we can't accept that as academic credits, but pretty much the only thing you have left are your electives. And if you can prove that that's professional training, we can give you some credits for professional training. So I have to go back to the Bible school. Remember the one that got shut down? I had to threaten a lawsuit. I had to do all kinds of stuff just to get my transcript, because they had lost my transcript. And they're like, well, we'll make one up for you. How far did you go? I wanted to say master's level, but I didn't. I resisted that temptation. So they gave me my new transcript. I submitted all this, had to do all kinds of paperwork, submitted it back to the college. They said, oh, yeah, that's definitely approved for professional training. And they gave me 30, remember I had like 40, they gave me 36 credit hours of credit within that month, which means I only had to finish the one class I was taking, and I would have my degree by December. How is that possible? Why did I suddenly just get a new advisor that was more open to helping me than the one that I had before? Why did Rob get sick and in the hospital, and I heard about just kidding. You get it? So anyway, I could tell you more and more. And you all know the story about when we adopted Elijah. I was doing the same thing because they told me there's absolutely no way you're going to be able to keep this kid. When you lose him, we will connect you with counselors, grief counselors, and all kinds of stuff, because he was going to go to a different family. I mean, there were so many obstacles. Part of it is, well, I don't want to go into too many details, but there were so many obstacles. And so I would sit there and run in my mind this movie about when we'd have to pack everything up, drop him off, never see him again, and I would get depressed. And then I realized, but look what I'm doing. I'm penetrating the level of consciousness, and look at the reality I'm creating. So I had to shift that. So I would go in my basement, and instead of just, oh God, please help us, oh Jesus, let's get on every prayer list that we can possibly get on, oh Lord. I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do. I'm just saying I haven't found it to be that effective. Just from my own personal experience. Because that offends people when I say that too. So what I would do is I would go down there, I would make a vivid picture in my mind of being in the courtroom. I would see the judge. I would, in my mind, even though they brought the gavel down, but in my mind I would hear them bring the gavel down, make it a done deal. I would see the birth certificate with our last name on it and our names on it as the parents. I would go through all of that in the theater of my imagination until I felt like it was real. And then I would simply give thanks that that was our reality. And my confession was, we'll never lose him, not even for a day. So, anyway, all kinds of things went crazy and shifted and changed. I remember the caseworker that was working for him, for Elijah, trying to get him in the best possible place, looking at me in my driveway crying and saying, I know this is the best home for him, but there are laws and I have to follow the laws. And I'm sorry, but by law, you're going to lose this kid. And I remember reassuring her and saying, it's okay, we're people of faith, it's going to be fine. And it happened exactly like I incubated it in my imagination. And I could tell you repeated stories. There was another family in our church who was wanting to adopt a child. And they were in a worse situation than we were in terms of their rights to the child to adopt. Had the child, not through any fault of their own, but because of the laws, had the child removed from their home, and a judge basically say, you have no rights. Went to a lawyer, the lawyer said, I can't take your case, you have no rights. But they had seen what we had gone through, and I just kept encouraging them, just keep incubating it in your mind. Keep incubating it. And I don't remember what it was the length of time, but they got strong in it. You couldn't convince them that they weren't going to end up being the parents of that child. And they're a family today, and it's been several years since then. The whole thing shifted. The whole court system shifted. How do those things happen? Is that just anecdotal evidence? It doesn't happen every time. It's just like anything else. It's like any skill that you learn. You're going to have some days that go better than others. If you're a musician, there's some days that the songs come out better than other days. There's some songs you can play and some songs you can't. If you're a writer or any kind of an artist, sometimes you have really good. Like one of the things Elton John said, most of Elton John's big hits were from his early stuff. His later stuff, not so much. And one of the things he said was, I guess I peaked too soon. So it's just like anything else in life. There are sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes maybe you get close and you don't get there all the way. Some people are just better at it than other people. But that doesn't mean that you can't do it. We all have that capability, and it really is that simple. deciding what you want specifically, settling it that it's going to happen, building it in your own consciousness until it seems so real to you that you can't not believe it. And then you don't operate off of what you see that hasn't manifested yet. You don't operate off of that schematic of what's right before you. If I operated off the schematic of what was before me, I never would have sat down with the banker. I never would have stood up and said, we're going to get $75,000. I never would have got the wheels going. I would have ended the miracle before it had the chance to show up. If I hadn't decided, well, the worst that could happen is I go through a semester of college and don't get any credit for it. No big deal, right? Pay for it, do all the work, but don't get any credit for it. But if I hadn't decided this other thing is possible, I never would have sat in those classes. And a couple months later, I never would have realized the miracle and the opportunity that could have shown up. Because in all those cases, I had to start acting like this was real. And then it showed up later. Yeah. I didn't wait for it to show up and say, oh, yeah, okay, this is the right way to go. You got two schematics, what you can see and what you can't see, but you can see because you've built it in the realm of your consciousness. Which one do you operate off of? If you operate off the one you can't see, it will manifest. If you operate off the one you can see, more often than not, you will stop before the miracle has time to show up, even though it was on the way. Make sense? There was one point, and I'm done, but there was one point when we were going through this process with Elijah, it was so emotionally grueling, and I'm such a control freak, truly. I'm working on it. That I could not stand the thought of just losing him, and I was going to ask that he be moved to a different foster care family so that we could just get the grieving part over with. They would have done that. If I had done that, we never would have adopted him because of the pressure that was coming at me here. If I'd acted on it like that, but see, that's what we do. We get under pressure. We doubt that what we're doing over here in the realm of the Spirit is really working. And so we act on what's putting pressure on us, and we oftentimes sabotage the miracle before it has a chance to show up. So you got to believe this. You got to make it real to you. Try it. Try it with $10. Just write yourself, I'm going to find $10, and just imagine yourself walking along and finding $10 bill, finding a $10 bill, seeing that $10 bill, looking it over and over and over and over like this. I know I'm rambling and going late. I'm sorry, guys, but let me just give you one more simple one. Because after a while, you get content. Enough changes with you that you just get content with life, that you don't need all this stuff, because it does take desire to make it work. So after a while, you just kind of, like you went through that phase, okay, cool, I learned how it worked, okay, great, but I'm pretty happy, so I'm not really feel like I'm missing anything in my life, so you don't keep using it. So I thought, I'm getting rusty. So last time I went to Arkansas, I said, okay, here's the thing. I'm going to manifest a gift that I know comes from God, not from a person, and it's going to have to be so unusual that I can't miss it. So in other words, it can't be somebody who liked the message, give me a Pentecostal handshake, where they put a $100 bill in your hand and they shake your hand because they like what you said, which happens in the Bible Belt. Doesn't happen here, but it happens in the Bible Belt. Man, I miss those days. It can't be, sometimes they would give me, different things, the ladies in maid or little trinkets. It can't be a normal gift. It's got to be something out of the ordinary, but I want it to know it came from God. And it has to be this weekend. So I did it on Friday night. It had to manifest by Sunday. So one of my friends there, he brings me this basically the Hebrew letters for the name of God that had been made. And he said, I have this gift I'm excited to give to you. And he gives me Yod, a Hey, a Vav, and a Hey. So think about it. So here I said, God, I want something that is out of the ordinary, that I know came from you, and there's no way I can doubt it came from you. And somebody gives me the name of God. In a church that isn't Messianic and isn't Jewish and they don't even know about necessarily any of them, the Hebrew letters. So just try it with little stuff. See that $10 bill, feel that $10 bill. Oh, wow, it's going to be so great when I find this $10 bill. And maybe set a deadline within a week and see if you don't just happen to come across a $10 bill. Because just those little things will start to build your faith in the principles that I'm teaching. All right. God bless you. Have a great day. See you second service if you're staying.